Welcome to A Fine Time, The Nanny Revisited. This is a podcast about The Nanny, where we recap each episode and then discuss, sharing our own unique take on each episode. I'm Bernadette.
And I'm Debbie. Today we're talking about episode 60, The Kibbutz. As usual, we'll start with a brief summary of the episode. Maggie has 3 weeks of winter break coming up, and Maxwell is concerned that she's going to spend her entire vacation making out, or worse, with her boyfriend. Maxwell decides to send her to a Swiss monastery and tasks Fran with talking Maggie into going. Fran tells Maggie that traveling alone, like she did to an Israeli kibbutz when she was about Maggie's age, can be amazing. Somehow, Maggie misunderstands the conversation and tells her father how excited she is about going to a kibbutz. Fran talks Maxwell into going along with Maggie's misunderstanding until a visit to her parents' home reminds her that her perception of her trip was colored by her experience losing her hat while there. To protect Maggie's innocence, Fran seeks to convince Maxwell to change his mind, and ultimately, Fran and the Sheffield family go to the kibbutz together, where Fran stops Yossi's son from taking Maggie's hat. Meanwhile, Cece and Niles end up on the same tropical island on their separate vacations. Bernadette, do you want to add anything?
Nope, that was a very thorough review.
Yet very succinct. So,
Yep.
would you like to take
No,
us
but
to?
this-
Yes. Would you like to take us to scene 1?
Yes, so we open up in the Sheffield living room, and Maggie is making out with a guy who we later learn is Eric. Hello,
Mhm.
Eric, who we probably will never again. And Fran is kind of peeking her head through the door that has always changed in the series, but currently leads out to the hallway near the office. And she's like, Maggie. And you would have thought, that she was telling her to quit it, but no, she says, tilt your head.
Exactly. Great advice from her nanny.
Yep. And so Niles is like standing behind Fran and he asks if he can vacuum um, now or not. And Fran's like, no, there's more than enough suction going on in there.
Mm-hmm.
And like he's kind of inquiring why she's, shouldn't she have some privacy then? And she's like, oh no, I'm doing an important job watching out for her father. And of course, at this point, she keeps talking, but it's no longer Niles behind her. It's Mr. Sheffield, and she's talking about like, okay, when he walks through that front door, I'm gonna put on my nanny shtick and say like, Maggie, you're too young, yada yada yada, um, and like if I had a daughter, or I don't know, I taught her. Oh, but then she keeps watching. Sorry. So she says that she'll put on that nanny shtick, and then she kind of is like bragging to
Mm-hmm.
Niles, like I taught
Who's no
her.
longer Niles?
Yeah, yes. Who's Maxwell? I taught her that because she's really like enjoying watching Maggie make out with this guy, which is kind of weird.
She's
And
living
then
vicariously.
yeah, and then she kind of like pats back and she pats us up. Oh, Niles, that abdominator I got you must be really working. And then she realizes though, and she doesn't turn around, but realization hits her that it is not Niles. And
Uh-huh.
she's like, of course, like you could never have anything on Mr. Sheffield. He's so handsome and young.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, he just pulls her into his office and inquires, should I be hiring another nanny, Miss Fine? And she's like, oh, that might help me out.
That would really free me up a lot.
Yeah. But needless to say, he's not too happy about this. And he notes that he doesn't want Maggie making out for the next 3 weeks of winter vacation. And so he, I'm trying to see, walked into Spitz neighbor couple. Okay, I'm sorry, I cannot decipher that specific thing I put.
So yeah, they go into they're now in his office, and he says that he's very concerned about Margaret. She has 3 weeks of winter vacation coming up, and I don't want her spending all that time on the couch kissing some boy. And
Yeah.
Fran makes the suggestion, well, why don't you do what my father did when I entered my
Ah,
makeout
yep.
years?
And he walked into the den and he spliced into the neighbor's cable. Thank
Correct.
you for that context, so
You're
I could
welcome.
decipher what I wrote. Uh, and then he's like, "And then what happened?" And she's like, "I didn't see him." I don't know. You can
We haven't
assume
seen him
that
since.
Morty has been watching that. Yeah, he's been watching that cable ever since. So she points out, she's going to be 17 and, at least, she's not off with a wild drifter on her motorcycle. And then, of course, cue the sound of a motorcycle outside. And she's like, gotta go. That's my date.
Yep.
Um, so is there anything else you want to add to that opening scene?
Nope. I think I'm ready to keep going.
Okay, take us to the kitchen then.
So we're in the kitchen and Sylvia's there. Oh, actually, I lied. I want to say two things. One, a couple weeks ago, we learned that Morty likes to watch the Spice Channel in his den, and he's picked up a thing or two, according to Sylvia.
Hmm.
That was point one. And point two, did you have 3 weeks of winter vacation when you were in high school?
Um,
Because we certainly didn't.
it like depends. Like there's at least 2 weeks.
Oh,
Like,
oh, you got more time than I did. We were guaranteed a week, and then
oh
depending on
wow, that's
how
short.
depending on how like the holidays fell, we could get up to two, but usually it was less than 2 weeks.
Yeah, I feel like it was at least two. It kind of depended on when like final like exams ended. Um,
Oh, you had final exams like that in high school? We did. I don't think we did.
yeah.
Huh.
Yeah, we had like end of semester exams.
Oh,
So that kind of then dictated like when we got out. But I mean, I feel like we at least got 2 weeks. And
oh,
it just
so
kind
it's
of
just us.
depended on the how the calendar fell in terms of like the rest. But again, that was a while ago, so I can't say with any certainty at this point. But yeah, so in the kitchen, we have Fran
Yeah.
and Sylvia.
Yeah. So we have Fran and Sylvia, and Sylvia is saying to Fran, if you still haven't made plans for Christmas vacation, you're welcome to join me and Daddy. And we don't exactly know what Fran and Morty are planning to do, but Fran lets us know that, as tempting as a bus tour of Florida dinner theaters sounds, I don't think I could stand the thrill of seeing the Ropers do love letters. Oh, and she looks at the newspaper. Oh, JJ Walker is going to be in 6 degrees of separation. And Sylvia's obviously like on her way out. And she adds, it's not too late to change your mind. The reviews say it's going to be dynamite. And Sylvia leaves, and Fran's and talking to Niles about how challenging it is to plan a vacation when you're single. And Niles is like, well, yes, it's so much nicer when you have a family, so you can lug their ski equipment around Vale. Sit around the fire listening to Niles, get me a brandy. Niles, bring me a comforter. Niles, go out in that blizzard for a pizza. And Maxwell, of course, his timing is fantastic. Niles, he walks in, and Niles says, what? Oh, and he immediately changes. What is that on your shoe, sir? Let me get that for you. And he immediately like flops down to the ground to clean Maxwell's shoe. Um, and so here's where Maxwell announces that he's made a decision. He can't risk Margaret spending all winter break with that boy. So he's going to send her abroad. Abroad, asks Fran, picking like to her, abroad was one word. And when Maxwell said it, abroad, or 2 words when Fran says it. You want her swinging that way? And he says, this isn't a laughing matter. I'm gonna send her. I'm gonna send her to the Swiss Alps. And so he's sending her to Switzerland, and Fran's like, oh, you're gonna send her away from. Well, first she's disappointed. You're sending her away from her family for the holidays, and Maxwell explains that she's going to Switzerland, and Fran's like, just her and her nanny? No, alone. I'm sending her to a convent where she can learn French, arts, and European history. And Fran just kind of looks at him, wowee. That sounds even more boring than even I can fathom. And I'm actually considering sitting through a bunch of plays where the only dialogue I'm going to hear is the audience going, what'd he say? Well, we learned that in addition to announcing his plan, the reason Maxwell has come to talk to her is because he doesn't care how much Margaret protests. He's her father, and what he says goes. So talk her into it, would you? Me? Yeah. And try to phrase it carefully. I don't want to come off like an ogre. And Fran's like, oh, don't worry. You're not going to be an ogre. I'll protect you. And then we jump to the next scene where, unless you go ahead, does she protect him?
No, they're sitting on the stairs. And just to as a note, like the living room is decorated for Christmas. Um, so she and Maggie are sitting on the stairs. Oh, the ogre saw you sucking face with Eric.
Mm-hmm.
He wants to send you, to Switzerland. What am I supposed to do there? Learn French? Um, but I guess he didn't see what I saw.
Yep.
Again, kind of like we would not have gotten that as children, I don't think. And then, but Fran does try to like persuade her. I've got two words for you. Sound of music.
Yeah.
Did you catch that, Debbie?
Sound of
Two
music.
words, sound of music.
Sounda
Yep.
is one word.
um, and so again, she kind of the plot, and by the end of it, she doesn't have to schlep her way up a mountain. And then, that's when Fran first tells Maggie about how she went to a kibbutz around her age. And Maggie's like, is that some type of like 60s hippie commune thing? And she's like, no, but I mean, I'm sure we smoked a lot more fish than they did. Um, but again, Maggie's still kind of worried that if she were to leave, that Eric will meet someone new. And so Fran advises her, just tell him that if he cheats, you'll know by looking at him. And Maggie's like, what kind of like that's stupid. Who would think that? And Fran's like, guys, like who would
Mm-hmm.
believe that? Guys.
Yep.
Um, so again, in this kind of short scene, Fran's not protecting Maxwell, but she
No.
is actually attempting to convince Maggie to go.
Right.
Do you have anything to add to that scene?
I do not. I'll take us to the office.
Okay.
So Maxwell's there with Cece and Niles, and Maxwell's looking at a calendar and he says, I propose we shut the office on the 16th. No one important is ever in town for the holidays. And then without missing a beat, you staying in town again, Cece? And Cece says, no, this year I'm getting as far away from this place as possible. And Niles chimes in, oh, Santa got my letter. And well, what about you, Niles? What are your plans? And Niles says to Maxwell, aren't we going to Vale? No, old man, you're on your own. I am? Yes, why don't you take a nice vacation all for yourself? And Cece's like, oh, please, this is the lost Mark's brother, Cheapo. And Niles is like, are you calling me cheap? And she says, well, you never break a buck. You live in Maxwell's house. You eat his food. Nanny Fine got you that Floby so you could cut your own hair. Where do you stash your cash? And also Maxwell comments about how, I know what I pay you and you're not spending it on your wardrobe.
Mm-hmm.
And so anyway, so Cece asks, where do you stash your cash? And Niles says, somewhere you'll never get near. Oh, she says, your mattress. And he says, no, his, and points to Maxwell.
Yep.
So Fran comes in and she says, Merry Christmas, Mr. Sheffield. Maggie's going to go into a convent, so your round young virgin will stay that way. And he's very happy, and how will I ever repay you? And she's like, oh, you'll think of something, 5th floor, Saks, Ralph Lauren leather goods, ask for Sadie, I put it on hold already. And then, the timing on the show is fantastic. Maggie comes in and she starts telling Maxwell how she's really excited about her trip. Fran really talked me into it. I can't. And every time she says, I'm really excited. Oh, stop. Fran talked me into it. Oh, you're making me blush. Stop. I can't. And then Maggie says, I can't wait to go on a kibbutz in Israel. Stop. Like it's no longer funny. And Fran says to her, I think you misunderstood our little conversation. Well, Maggie says, no, I remember. You said Dad was an ogre. And Fran cuts her off. No, I said okra. Okra was what we grew on the kibbutz. And Maggie's like, oh, whatever. I'm going to go kiss Eric goodbye. Fran, you were so right when you tilt your head. And Fran's just like ushering her out of the room. Honey, look, if you're going on a kibbutz, start letting the hair on your legs grow out. So Maggie leaves and Maxwell turns to Fran, and he sort of comes to the conclusion that I think we all probably come to already. It's amazing. Every time I ask you to do something, you manage to screw it up. And Fran points out, and yet you continue to ask me. And so Maxwell says to her, there's no way Margaret is going to a kibbutz unchaperoned at her age. Why? My mother let me go when I was a teenager. Maxwell's like, oh, you must have been a piece of work back then. Fran's like, you are so wrong. My mother and I had a very open relationship. And then we start a flashback. Do you want me to continue going and count this all as one scene, or do you want to take over?
You can if you want.
Okay.
Go for it.
So we flash back to, shall we say, Val and Fran in their youth. Yep. And I think this is a place where we should talk about how they're dressed and how it's different. Okay. Yes. So I'm not really sure. This must have been like the either late 60s or early 70s.
But the reference is to something from 1980. That's what was so confusing to me.
So there are actually a lot of like things like that I feel like we'll talk about more in our notable New Yorkers segment. But like Fran has like, are they cornrows? Like
it seems like that, or like or dreads.
Yeah. So like her hair is all braided. It's not the big poofy hair we're used to. Val, on the other hand, looks like a very fluffy Pomeranian. Like her hair looks like it's over a foot across in diameter. And
almost
it's like
kind of as if she's been electrocuted.
Yeah, it's
like a cartoon kind of,
And she has a lot of blue eyeshadow on, and yeah. Fran's in like
almost as if she's trying to have like an afro look, but like not quite making that happen.
And
if that makes any sense.
It's not flattering. I think we could agree. Her regular hairstyle looks better for her face. And so Fran's in like the matching pants and like shirt. The shirt is like long sleeve, but it's a belly shirt. It's red and black, and the pants are red and black. And Val's in like this floral, I think it's a dress with like it's a black dress, a black pattern with pink and blue flowers on it. And then it has trim of a different pattern of flowers on it. It's different, shall we say. So into the dialogue, we cut into Fran saying to Val, so Val, here's the scam we tell my mother. The kibbutz is completely chaperoned. There are no gorgeous, shirtless Israeli guys, and we're only there to absorb the rich and wonderful culture of our people. And Val's like, got it. And I think she asks about Sylvia's latest invention, which is frozen yogurt. Like, why does your mother keep putting the yogurt in the freezer? And Fran's like, oh, it's her new invention, frozen yogurt. Parents are so stupid. And so they decide to watch some TV because the guy from Blue Lagoon is going to be on. He's going to be such a big star. And they turn on the TV, and instead they find a program with which is announced by the person on the very old television. Now I want you to say hello to one of the most talented, young, bright, exciting Broadway producers, Mr. Maxwell Sheffield. And they're watching, and Fran comments on his appearance. Oh, is he a babe? And so we see this like little interview with Maxwell, who says, to think I was going to do this musical with these people running around dressed like cats. Thankfully, my secretary talked me out of it. Take a bow, Miss Cece Babcock. And the like video on the television screen cuts to not a younger looking Niles and Cece. And Cece is totally a brunette. And Niles is giving her bunny ears as she takes her bow. And so I think that's when Sylvia comes in. Yeah. And she is also dressed in, shall we say, period garb. Um, her she's wearing like another outfit that's pink and black, and her hair is big. And anyway, so she comes in and she says to Fran, I just got off the phone with Mrs. Spielberg from down the hall, and her son is dying to take you out. And Fran's like, Steven, the geek from AV Squad? Ew. And so Sylvia's like, okay, how about Mrs. Milken's son? He's very smart. And Fran's like, meanwhile, he stole money out of my locker, Ma. And so now that poor Sylvia has walked into the room, Fran and Val are gonna try to, run the scam on her. And Fran says, so Val, what do you want to do this summer vacation? I want to go somewhere where I can expand my mind and absorb all the ancient heritage of my people. And Sylvia sees through it immediately. You're not going to a kibbutz. Ma, how did you know? Darling, I'm your mother. I read your diary. And I think that's when the doorbell rings, and there's Grandma Yetta, who's also dolled up in period garb. She's wearing another like outfit similar to what Sylvia's wearing, and she has big, I think she has blonde. No, she has does she blonde or brunette? She doesn't have a gray wig on. I remember that. Anyway, where was I? So anyway, Sylvia and Yetta are there because, as Yetta puts it, Uncle Jack's building has gone condom. And
Yeah.
condom is not the right word.
No.
So Sylvia comments to her that your Michigana granddaughter wants to go to a kibbutz. And Yetta says, well, you went when you were her age. And Fran's like, Ma, because she caught her. And Sylvia's like, no, that was different. I was building a nation. And then she turned, as she and Yetta are getting ready to leave, Sylvia says to Fran that you better get this kibbutz thing out of your head and start thinking about your future now. Otherwise, you're going to end up like your cousin Myra, over 30 and still single. And, Fran closes the door behind her mom and grandma. Sure, Ma, like that's ever going to happen. She locks the door and goes back to Val. Oh, Val, you should see my cousin Myra. It's so pathetic. 32 years old in a really short mini skirt, high heels, big hair. It's so sad. Needless to say, it's a bit of foreshadowing. Anyway, so then
I thought it's interesting too that this is like the second in the season that specifically 32 was mentioned.
That's a good point. That's a very good point. And so then we're back in Maxwell's office, and so he's asking Fran about her background. Your mother let you go 7,000 miles across the world, no argument. Yeah. This is going to be a really good experience for Maggie. I just wish you would trust me as much as my mother did. And then there's like a pop, like a little thought bubble. And it's Sylvia dolled up from the 70s, 80s, late 60s, whenever this was. It must have been, you're right. It must have been like the late 70s or early 80s, because otherwise it doesn't make any sense. I'm sorry. That was,
and we can talk more about it. But the Blue Lagoon came out in 1980, but the show they're on is like in the 70s. So I don't know. It's a time vortex.
Yeah. Anyway, so Sylvia in the thought bubble says, oh, sure, a vacuum accident on your neck. I don't trust you as far as I could throw you, young lady. And like, that's sort of the end of it. I feel like I've done a lot of talking. Would you like to add anything else?
No, you got it.
All right. Would you like to take us to the fine family home?
Yes. So Fran has let herself into the apartment, and she's looking around. Ma, there's nobody out there in the living room or the kitchen. And so she goes down to where we assume is the bedroom, and suddenly, she's like, anybody? Oh my God.
Yep.
And she comes rushing out, and then Sylvia follows. And Sylvia, we have to say it, she has like, is it leopard print undergarments and a red robe?
Uh-huh. And I wouldn't call it undergarments. I would call it like she's in, like, it's not a negligee. She's in lingerie. There we go.
Yes. Yes. That's yes. Thank you.
You're welcome.
And,
We're giving our audience a
anybody
visual.
told you to knock, on a
When
bedroom.
entering someone's bedroom,
And Fran explains, well, I heard sounds of ecstasy and thought you were eating a cheesecake.
yep.
Was it Sylvia who said sounds of ecstasy?
No, it was Fran.
Okay, it was Fran. Okay. But she assumed it was because she was eating cheesecake. And Sylvia's just like, forget you ever saw anything. And she's like, I can't. It burned into my cornea. So they go, and Fran needs to take a swig of Manischewitz. I don't know
Good
if I said
job. Yeah, you
that
pronounced that
correctly.
perfectly.
Yay! And she's like, good vintage, May. um, and anyway, so Fran's informing her about Maggie going on the kibbutz, and Sylvia's like, Fran, you hated the kibbutz. How do you know? I'm your mother, because your journal, basically, I read it. I'm your mother. And actually, so she has a copy because Fran's apparently had asked ahead of time for Sylvia to pull out like her box of memories.
Hmm.
And so in there is her journal, and it's like one of those composite notebooks. Is that what it's called?
Yeah, it's like the I think that's what they're called. It's like the marble composite notebook.
Yeah. But has like bright flower sticker, rainbow, whatever on the cover. And again, Fran though like remembers it different. Like, I know that can't be possible. And she opens her journal, and the first thing, I hate books. And so Sylvia is kind of reminding her, like, you didn't even stay like halfway. Because Fran also reads that like by Friday she was like growing out her arm hair, and she made Val sneak out to Jordan to get some like Bic razors or something.
Let me
And so
just
apparently,
clarify. She's reading her journal and she says Friday, almost able to braid armpit hair,
oh yes, hmm,
which I think is a different visual than arm hair.
sorry, armpit hair, yes. And so Sylvie's like, yeah, you didn't even make it. You came home halfway through. We had to tell them that Nana died, get the deposit. And
Hmm.
then we kind of go like into a flashback. And because Fran's like, well, why do I remember it so, like different? And there's a flashback. And Val's like, there's like tall grass or something. And Val's trying to find um, Fran, but after she passes by, Fran kind of peeks out, and she has a handsome young man next to her, and he's speaking Hebrew,
Yep.
and she's just responding, yes, yes, shalom, matzo ball, like that kind of stuff. And then she's like, and then once like Val's truly gone, she turns to him and she goes, Kanish me. And so then we get out of that flashback. And so Friend's like, oh, yeah, that's when I lost my hat. And she looks
Hmm.
at Sylvia. And so Sylvia's like, oh, yeah, maybe Maggie will have as good of a time as you did. And Fred's like, over my dead body. Is there anything you'd like to add to that
No,
scene?
I'm happy to take us to the kitchen. Um, so
Okay, go for it.
so Niles is cleaning and he looks down at his dish rag and he says, "Oh, this old dish rag has seen better days." And in walks Cece and he says, "Were your ears burning?" And she's like, "Look, Diamond Joe, I brought you some travel brochures. Don't worry, they're free. Let's see." And she's like flipping through them for him. Ooh, windsurfing in St. Bart's. Uh-oh, $25 equipment fee. And then she picks up another one. Well, if you flip one really fast, it's almost like you're there. And he's like, well, is that how you make your dates move? And then he informs her that, I've made travel plans. And so she asks, well, which island did you decide on, Staten or Coney? And he says, actually, I can afford to make a very lovely trip. I sold a pair of gaudy cufflinks Mr. Sheffield gave me, one treble clef, one bass clef. And she just looks at him and says, I gave Maxwell those for his birthday. And he's like, oh, well then, thanks for the trip. And so Fran rushes in, where's Mr. Sheffield? I've got to talk to him about Maggie going on this kibbutz. And Niall's like, but didn't you already talk him into that this morning? And she's like, yeah, but it's this afternoon. Now I got to talk him out of it. And he's like, oh, it's too late. He's already gone shopping with her for the trip. Oh, good. Okay. Fran's like, okay, she's trying on short shorts and tube tops, and he's looking at salesmen looking at her in short shorts and tube tops. They're at each other's throats. The trip's off. My work is done. Phew. And then turns out her work is not done. Because in come Maxwell and Maggie. They've had a great time at the mall. They're in a good mood. They're like, oh, you got to see this. And they open their jackets, and he's wearing a sweater that says daddies, and she's wearing a matching one that says little girl.
Mhm.
And they've clearly bonded. They've had a great time. Maggie thanks him for all the cool stuff and says, I love you. And he says, I love you too. And she leaves. And then he's talking to Miss Fine, saying, I can't thank you enough. I don't think we've ever been this close. I just hope she has as thrilling a time on the kibbutz as you did. And
Mhm.
Fran's like, yeah, well, be careful what you hope for. And he says, Margaret and I are we're like friends. We went shopping just now. And we ran into some of her schoolmates. And for the first time ever, she didn't make me hide. And Fran's like, sweet, touching, love it. Now haul yourself upstairs and tell her she can't go. Why? They closed Israel for Hanukkah. Too many people, too many candles, big fire hazard. And he doesn't believe her for a second. He's like, all right, you've got exactly he tells her she needs to clarify things. And she's like, all right, you want to know what it really is? I kind of remembered the kibbutz was where I lost and before she could say say exactly what she lost, the kids rush downstairs with it's Brighton and Gracie. Oh, hi kids, what's new? And they start jabbering, and Maxwell's not having it. He says, you know, everybody quiet except Miss Fine. Now, you were saying you don't want Margaret to go to the kibbutz because that's where you lost your, and he waits for her to answer. And so she again volunteers hat. Hat, says everyone in the room, because they can't believe that's the answer. And so Maxwell says, all right, I take it you were very attached to this hat. And Fran makes the comment, not as much as my mother was. And he's like, look, what on earth is the big deal about losing your, oh God, oh my God, everybody out, not you, Miss Fine. And then he's like, why do I ever listen to you? And she kind of states the obvious, my voice is kind of hard to tune out. And he concludes that Margaret is not going to go to the kibbutz, and that's final. It was not actually final. Do you want to add anything, or would you like to take us to the kibbutz?
Oh, yeah, sure. Um, so again, we it turns out the solution is that they are all there. It's the same scene, like setting that we saw in the flashback earlier. And so again, the others are working. Fran, however, is kind of like it's not cool. Is it a swimsuit or at least a swimsuit top
So
or just like a skimpy out? I don't know because
it's
she's sun tanning.
yeah, it's not what I would think of to wear in Israel. I'll put it that way. I don't know if it's an actual bikini top, but it definitely looks like it's mostly open. She's not covering very much. Um, yeah,
Mhm. And you know, so Maxwell though is dressed for working, and Fran actually sends some like, go. You need like a whole thing of grapefruit, like a whole basket or something, or else we'll get kicked
wheelbarrow.
out. Oh yeah, or else we'll get kicked out, and there's no Ramada anywhere near.
Yep,
So he goes off, and then we hear Fran, and it's the guy from earlier in the flashback.
it's the guy who took her hat.
Yes. And oh, you're still working here? Yeah, me and with my son. And we pan over and we see that where Maggie's like up on a ladder, like helping to pick fruit or whatever. Now a guy, the son, has kind of walked up to her and
He's smiling
literally,
handsomely and
yeah, and then takes her hat, right?
well, so she's holding her hat. She's not wearing the hat. And he
Yeah.
says, like kibbutz, and she is like, yeah. And he's like, would you like me to take your hat? And Fran does not allow it.
Yeah, yes, yes. She, like she storms over there. There will be no hat taking. So
Yeah, she
yeah.
grabs the hat from Maggie and shoves it down on Maggie's head.
Yep. Yep. So it's a really quick scene just to show that the family has ended up going all together.
Correct.
Anything else you want to add to that?
Nope.
Then would you like to take us to Niall's vacation?
So Niles is clearly on like some tropical island and he's having a nice time, he's at the bar and he says, nice tan Sheila, and he's walking with his drink. Bonjour, Marisol. Oh, shake it, Miss Babcock. And then he and the person who is dancing stop and they turn and they realize it's each other. And I think he comments, oh, daylight come and me want go home.
Yep. Because we
And
don't see Cece's face at first. Like her back is to the audience.
right, and she's wearing like a long dress and she has a big hat on.
Very
Um,
vacation, style.
exactly. And they managed to find each other despite getting as far away from New York as they could.
Yep. And that's
And
the episode.
exactly. All right. Are there things we want to talk about before we get into our shticks?
I'm trying to just a couple of things. So I think it was didn't Cece call him Diamond Jim, not Joe?
Oh, maybe I got that wrong.
Okay. I was just
No, I thought it was Diamond Jim because that I have as one of my references.
yeah, I put Diamond Jim. You said Diamond Joe. That's why
Oh,
I just wanted
oh,
to double
sorry.
check.
Yes, sorry.
Okay.
Dim, Joe, John. There's so many
J
three-letter
name.
J
Yeah.
names for men.
J names for men. It sounds
Exactly.
like
I,
an outlet
I,
store.
I could have picked any one of them, and I had a shot at being right. Um,
um yeah, I think some of this stuff I plan on talking about it's probably going to be intertwined with some of the shticks.
okay.
So do you have anything though before we get into it?
I mean, I'll just reiterate our confusion as to the exact timing of when things happened and how this worked. Because I mean,
Yeah.
so this sort of ties into the future fun, but not really. I mean, we find out at a later point that when Fran was born, Kennedy was president. Um,
Mm,
and so everyone was optimistic about the future, which very much narrows when she was actually born.
yeah.
Um, but then there's also like in the conversation, like between her and Val, like it's clear like they're talking about summer vacation, which to me says they're still in high school, especially the references to like, Steven in AV club. We also later learned that, I mean, I think we know that Fran never went to college. She went to beauty school, but like not college. So like it's before she graduated from high school. I don't know. The timing just doesn't make a lot of sense.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's all I'll
And
say.
this kind of then transitions us into fashion, but in terms of like Val and Fran, what they're wearing when we are in the flashbacks.
Hmm.
Like, well, and specifically the hairstyles to my like 2022 eyes seems like, cultural appropriation. Um, and but could very well be again true to what it was like back then. So I can't really say.
Oh, I didn't even think of that. And now I feel like my comments on Val's hair are probably insensitive. And I apologize if I offended
Yeah.
anybody.
And
Um,
obviously I don't mean that to be derogatory to like natural hair. I think specifically on Val it didn't quite work because again, it seems like there was a bit of cultural appropriation through that. So yes, not to disparage like the actual hairstyles. I felt just a little uncomfortable them being on them, if that makes any sense.
right. It also Yeah, I mean, it's just so markedly different from how they normally have their hair done.
Yeah, kind of.
It's
Yeah,
shocking, I guess.
yeah. And then obviously then like I think that's like kind of really pointing out like Sylvia is mostly dark haired except for like a streak of
Yes.
blonde at the front. Cece, as you mentioned, is quite the brunette. She has like long hair too.
And
So really
and
going for the opposite of the current shorter blonde hair.
right, and also she has really, like, I don't wanna call them harsh, but bangs. She has very thick bangs,
Yeah.
like, that are straight across, um, and she's wearing big, thick glasses,
Mhm.
um, which, as a side note, like, what we know about Cece's background, like, if you recall from, season 1 and season 2, we've learned that Cece comes from money. We know that Cece was, had a coming out party. She, you know, her friends are all society women, even though they don't all like each other. So I find it sort of surprising that she looked the way she did in that flashback.
Mhm. Yeah. And kind of again tying into the like the timeline of things is like I looked it up and Cats debuted on October 7th, 1982. So again, it makes if they're referencing the Blue Lagoon, which came out in 1980, then supposedly that episode's like 1980, 1981, or something like that.
Hmm.
Anyway,
Which also
let's keep
means that,
back on track.
but just on that note, let's even pretend it was 1982, right?
Yeah.
Or heck, let's just say 81, because then it's before Cats is open. So Maxwell's still saying, I dodged a bullet here, because
Yes.
we haven't seen how popular Cats is. Cats was actually the longest running show on Broadway until Phantom of the Opera dethroned it.
Mhm.
Um, so that means, let's say it's 1981. If Fran was born while Kennedy was president, that means she would be like 18
Mhm.
at least.
Yeah.
So, like, anyway, it doesn't
Anyway.
it doesn't make sense. I think that's the bottom line.
Yeah. Yeah, but anyway, that was like kind of my comment on the fashion when we go back in time because it's also like very way more 70s feeling than the 80s, right?
Well, do you think that's actually like something like that was intentional? Like, I'm trying to come up with a way that this makes sense. Like, Fran's fashion, like the colors and the big hair, it's very 80s, and like in contemporary, like the Nanny time frame, it's the 90s. So, like, is it possible that she's just like, a few years behind consistently?
Huh. I hadn't thought about that. That's interesting.
Just,
Maybe.
just a thought. Um, I mean, there's an episode where Fran and Val go to their high school reunion. So, diving a little
Yeah.
bit into future fun, but I promise I'm not saying anything super hot. Um, and one of the like mean girls from her high school comments on Fran and Val's attire, and by saying, "You see, if you wait long enough, everything comes back around." So maybe Fran just is usually behind.
Mhm. Yeah. Well, so then going into fashion, did you have any favorites in this episode?
Not really.
Yeah.
I definitely didn't like the flashback attire, because
Mhm.
it is very jarring. Um, I wasn't great. No, I hate to say it. I mean, I guess if I had to pick something, I liked Maggie's blue velvet dress.
Oh, yeah, that was like pretty nice. Or was it like purplish?
It was purple blue. It
Maybe
was dark.
indigo.
Yeah, but I mean, whatever color it was, I think that was probably the best outfit in the episode.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think it's a long sleeve skater dress. So,
Mhm. Yeah. Okay.
uh,
So was there any other fashion though that you wanted to talk about?
I was gonna just ask, what did you think of Sylvia's lingerie? It was very Sylvia, wasn't it?
Yes,
Yeah, exactly. That was my
it
thought as
was.
well. It was very her.
Mhm. Mm-hmm.
So yeah.
And
Do you
she
have
kept
any
her robe open for much longer than I thought she would.
fair?
Um, yeah.
Although in fairness, we should give her, some leeway. She did just get walked in on by her grown daughter, who
Yeah.
should have known better than to open her bedroom door without knocking.
Mm-hmm.
So she can be forgiven for being a little kerfuffled, a little, you know, confused.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah. Shall we jump to notable New Yorkers?
Yes. Yep. Um, so uh was the dominator thing a real thing? Uh I don't know if I wrote it down correctly. Whatever Fran gave Niles
The
supposedly.
Floby.
No, no, no. The abdominator
Oh,
something
I thought,
from
yeah, I
the
think it is
first
the
movie.
abdominizer.
Okay,
Um,
yes.
so according to our friends at Wikipedia, it was an abdominal exerciser that was invented back in 1984 by a Canadian chiropractor, and it was marketed through infomercials. And apparently that it sold over 6 million uh, units, I guess,
Hmm.
or 6
Interesting.
million units were sold. According to our friends at Wikipedia, 6 million were sold in 57 countries.
Wow.
It stopped product. It's no longer being sold, so you cannot go and get one now unless it's used.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So then the reference to J.J. Walker,
J.J. Walker was a character portrayed by James Carter Walker on Good Times, and that's according to our friends at Wikipedia.
and that connects with then the dynamite reference.
Oh, I didn't know what the dynamite thing was.
I think that's from Good Times. Um, 6 Degrees of Separation.
That is a play exploring the premise that everyone is connected by a chain of no more than 6 acquaintances. That's according to our friends at Wikipedia.
Mm-hmm. And then let's see here.
While you're looking, Love Letters. That's one of the other plays that was mentioned by Sylvia. Or sorry, that one's mentioned by Fran. It was a play centering on characters who sit side by side, reading cards, letters, and notes from 50 years, discussing their ambitions, hopes, dreams, victories, defeats, and disappointments. And that's according to our friends at Wikipedia. And I also did Google dynamite, and you're right. That is a Jimmy Walker reference. So
Um, so then again, we kind of already mentioned that whenever Fran's trying to convince Maggie to go, 2 words, Sound of Music or Sounda, as you said.
mhm.
And basically, I think we've talked about Sound of Music before.
We have
Uh, so, I mean, it's a pretty well
famous.
known, yes.
Yeah.
And then I thought it was funny whenever, I don't know if you caught this or not. Did you
Mhm.
catch it whenever Fran tells Maxwell that your round young virgin will stay that way?
I did catch that, but is that a reference to something?
She's misquoting the lyrics to Silent Night. So she
Oh,
says round young virgin, and it's round yon virgin in Silent Night.
oh, I didn't
Yeah.
pick up on that.
Yeah. That's I don't blame you, but I was just like, she clearly misheard those lyrics at some point.
It's an understandable mishearing.
Mm-hmm.
I don't use the word yawn too often, but I do use the word young.
Mm-hmm. Uh, and again, like different use of the word round. Round young virgin versus round young virgin. There's a different kind of meaning to that. But yeah, I don't know if you wanted to talk about ogres or not, since
I didn't, but if you have
okay.
something you want to say about ogres
No,
versus okras, I'm
no,
here
I
for
mean,
it.
I just of course immediately thought of Shrek.
That's what I thought of as well, which I believe post-dated the Nanny.
Oh yeah, that definitely comes after, but still. Um, but yeah, so whenever we are in the flashback, there's a couple of things. Again, the frozen yogurt actually becomes a thing, obviously.
Yeah, and I tried to figure it out. So according to our friends at frozendessertsupplies.com, frozen yogurt was first introduced by H.P. Hood in the 1970s, which he originally called Frogurt.
Hmm. And then, like the show that they're
Virginia
referencing,
Graham.
Graham,
Hmm.
again, according to this, that went through the mid 70s,
Correct.
which would not then meet up with the Lagoon in 1980.
I know. Um,
Ugh.
yeah. Actually, before we continue with that, there was a reference to the Marx Brothers beforehand.
Oh yeah, yeah.
The Marx Brothers were an American family comedy, family of comedians that achieved success on both on Broadway in motion pictures and through vaudeville from 1905 to 1949. That's according to our friends at Wikipedia.
Hmm.
Um, so
Yeah.
back to the guy from the Blue Lagoon. Um,
Hmm.
he it starred Christopher Atkins, and I think that's what he's still most best known for,
Hmm.
Blue Lagoon. So
Yeah. Yep. And then again, in that same kind of um, flash flashback, the reference to cats,
yep,
as we talked about, and that has been brought up numerous times before.
and will continue to be brought up numerous times.
Yeah, and then there's like kind of a reference, like we're made to think that Sylvia is referring to Steven Spielberg,
Uh-huh.
as the son from the Mrs. Spielberg down the hall.
Mm-hmm.
He AV, like, and that's the thing too, timeline wise.
Exactly.
Like he would have already been big at this point. I don't understand.
So I didn't think of it that way, but I did Wikipedia him. He was born in 1946, which
Okay.
means he's significantly older than Fran and would not have been the geek from AV Squad.
Yeah. Does he have a younger brother or what?
I
Like,
don't know, but I think the reason he was picked is because he's Jewish. He's a well-known Jewish man.
yeah. I mean, because already Jaws came out in 1975, you
I
know,
love that you know that.
and he already had stuff like before then. So like, yeah, it made no sense to me.
Did you catch the other reference in that discussion?
Milken?
Mm-hmm. Do you know who that is?
No.
It's a reference to, I believe, Michael Milken, who's known for developing junk bonds, and he pled guilty to violations of security laws.
Oh,
Um,
well, dodged a bullet then.
well, I mean that's the point. Fran says he stole money out of my locker.
Ah.
Um,
Mhm.
he was also born in 1946 and was also Jewish.
Interesting.
So I think they just like tried to identify, high profile. Like he would have been Milken would have been very well known in the 80s.
Mhm.
But so I think they just tried to like pick out um well known high profile Jewish men
Mhm.
to like make it like, oh look, these were options. Um these were your dating options. Fran,
Mhm.
find a nice Jewish boy and settle down.
Mhm.
Um so yeah.
Yeah.
Um,
Do you have any before Diamond Jim?
I do not.
Okay. So then the next one's Diamond Jim.
You mean Diamond Joe? No, Diamond Jim. I think that's a reference to a biographical film about James Buchanan Brady. That's according to our friends. And I want to say Wikipedia.
Mhm. And then obviously like at the end when Niall says, "Oh daylight come and me want to go home."
Yep.
Those are lyrics.
Yeah, from Deo, the Banana Boat song, which is a traditional Jamaican folk song. And
Mhm.
that's according to our friends at Wikipedia as well.
Do you have any other ones?
I did not. I sort of feel like the past few weeks we've had fewer references than normal.
Hmm. Yeah. So then, shall we move on to Yiddishkop, which we have quite a bit. Again,
We
this is
do. We do. So first off, shtick. I'm not going to define it since we've used it on pretty much every episode of our show thus far. If you haven't figured it out, I'm sorry. Um, Sylvia refers to Fran to Yetta as your Michigana granddaughter. Michigana
mhm,
means crazy. Um, Fran, when she's back at her parents' house, she says she needs a swig of Manischewitz. And she takes a swig of wine. Manischewitz is actually a company that originated in Cincinnati, Ohio in the late 1800s and has been making traditional Jewish foods ever since. That's according to Manishevitz's website. They are probably most famous for their wine, which is kosher. In order for kosher wine to actually be kosher, it needs to be handled only by Jewish people, I believe. Um, in the flashback scene where she's talking to the Israeli guy who she does not speak Hebrew, she drops a number of Jewish sounding words, including bagel, which is the most famous Jewish food in America and is standard American bread. It comes from the German, which actually in German it means bracelet, and that's all according to our friends at mygewishlearning.com. They have an article titled "The Bagel," or it's about the bagel, or something like that.
mhm.
Um, she says shalom, which we've covered in previous episodes, which means hello, goodbye, and peace. She says matzo ball, which is a classic Passover food. It's also they're also found in a type of soup when one is sick that has magical healing properties. Um, she says the last thing she says to this guy is knishmi. Knish is a traditional Ashkenazi snack-filled dough, which I think we've talked about previously, and that's according to our friends at Wikipedia. I guess the one more, and then I'll get to the big one. When Yetta and Sylvia are leaving the fine apartment, you can actually see a mezuzah on the door frame. A mezuzah is like it has a specific prayer scroll in it that's written out by a scribe. It has a specific prayer on it, and you're supposed to put it on your door frame in a certain place, and you're supposed to, basically kiss it when you come and go. You put it on every door frame of every room that is lived in your house, meaning you don't include like the kitchen and I don't and the bathroom. Those are the two rooms I think you don't include. And then I guess the final big one is a kibbutz. It is a unique type of settlement in Israel that is traditionally agrarian. It's an agrarian collective community. The first one was actually founded in 1910, and apparently there are now over 270 of them in Israel. And that is according to our friends at touristisrael.com. I think that's all of them. Did I miss any?
So just some stuff we've had before. Schlep, when she's talking about schlepping up the mountain for Sound of Music, and then obviously like Hanukkah.
Oh, yes, Hanukkah. Thank you. I should mention her comment to Maxwell about how they've closed Israel for Hanukkah. Too many candles, too many menorahs, too many candles. Big fire hazard. Too many people, whatever. It's sort of interesting there. So Hanukkah, I think we've talked about before. It celebrates the Maccabees' triumph, and the fact that the oil left in the temple burned for 8 days instead of one day when it should have only burned for one day. Her comment about too many candles, big fire hazard, stuck with me because um, you're supposed to actually light your menorah in your window because you're supposed to share the light with those around you, etc. And there are actually all kinds of rules about like what happened, like how big the largest Hanukkah can be. So Hanukkah is the actual name for what most people call a menorah. Menorah just means candelabra, but Hanukkah is specific to Hanukkah and has the, 8 arms plus the shamus, the helper candle. Um, the largest menorah. I'm sorry, I'm totally going off on a tangent here, but I think it is actually rather interesting, and I hope our listeners agree. If not, you can fast forward for the next minute or so. Um, the largest Hanukkah in the world is actually in New York City, And halakhically speaking, so under Jewish law, the tallest it can possibly be is 36 feet. And I don't know how the rabbis came up with that, but that is the answer. Like, it cannot be any larger and still be a Hanukkah. It comes down to the fact that you need to be able to view the light from the ground. So that then raises the question, what happens if someone lives on, like, let's say the 10th floor of an apartment building? What do you do with your menorah? Do you still stick it in your window, or what do you do? The answer is, if you live in an area where there are other residences that are equally high up and can see your window, you still put your Hanukkah in the window. If not, you are supposed to actually light it on the floor by your door, because
Huh.
that's as close to the ground as you can get. Now,
Sounds
of
like
course,
a fire hazard.
exactly. Of course, that is definitely a fire hazard, so please don't trip over your Hanukkahs. But yeah, I did some digging into this a couple years ago, and I just thought that was really interesting.
Mhm.
Um, so I thought I would share. Did I miss anything else?
I don't think so, and that was interesting.
Thank you. Thank you
Um,
for
so
humoring me. I appreciate it.
yeah, 90s nostalgia then.
Old cars.
Yes. Yep. Um, I so I feel like the whole plot a bit, um, like, but I guess then again not, since
Yeah,
there's like a recent movie I think that I didn't see, but was all about trying to prevent the kid from having sex. I don't know.
I mean, I feel like that's still like a major plot point on like all kinds of television.
Yeah. But then at the same time too, you have other shows that are like, oh yes, everybody in high school is just going around having sex all the time.
Right. Which
So I don't know, it's a mixture.
yeah, I think it's still a big enough thing that like parents are still concerned about it. Um, I don't think that's going to change. I also don't think most parents have the resources to send their kid away for 3 weeks
To
to
a
a
convent
to a convent or a
or
kibbutz.
something.
Exactly. I think most
Yeah.
people would send them to like a grandparent or a relative in some remote location.
Mhm.
I kind of feel like, you know,
Well, and I don't see like how, again, like this goes back to the overall plot of this, and this is not necessarily a 90s nostalgia, but like I don't see why Maxwell feels like he has to send her away, like away from the family, if that makes sense. Like
because
why
the
he has
because
to
Eric is
go
still
by
there.
no, no, but why she has to go by herself. I mean, obviously at the end they come to the conclusion they can all go somewhere else, right?
Mhm.
So, anyway, um again, I feel like she would have an easier time keeping in contact with Eric
Mhm.
these days in terms of like cell phone, all that kind of stuff.
Maybe not in Switzerland, but yeah.
I guess depending on your phone plan.
I mean, I suppose there's Wi-Fi there also, so never mind.
um but yeah, I mean, was there anything that really kind of stood out to you was
The
90s?
flashbacks, but they're not 90s, they're just dated, which they're
Mm,
meant to be,
mhm.
obviously. Did you I will just say, like, technologically speaking, in the flashback, the old television and the very old remote control, which was connected to the TV and had a dial,
Mm,
which I
mhm.
think predates us.
Yes. Yeah. I was trying to think if there was uh it's not coming to me. I'll let you know if I think about it before we end this episode.
That's fine. Um,
Otherwise, I don't really have anything else, I don't think.
Maggie going to the mall with Maxwell.
Oh, yeah.
I feel like most people do their shopping online now.
Mhm.
So that felt a little dated. Um, the travel brochures.
Oh, yeah.
I feel like everything's online now. Um, and yeah, I think that I'm out.
Okay. So then some future fun?
I don't have too much for us today. But there is definitely more travel in the future for members of the Sheffield clan. I think Brighton ends up going to Paris. Maggie is going to go to Japan at one point. Um, Fran and Maxwell end up in Paris. Um, so there's lots of travel for people in the future. Um, I think I mentioned last week that the family will move to California at the end of the show. Um, so kind of to your comment about uh Eric and there's this new guy we've never heard of, never seen, etc. Um, we do actually meet the guy who Maggie settles down with, you know,
What?
in season 6. And even more interestingly, he's a relative of Barbara Streisand.
Is he Eric?
He is not Eric. He is not. He's a nice Jewish boy
Mhm.
um, who happens to be an underwear model.
Oh, of course.
Just happens to be. Like maybe I think that's the biggest spoiler I've given our listeners. So I hope I haven't offended anybody. Um, and then the last thing I'll say is we will see further flashbacks to Fran's youth. Like we'll see her when she's like 7 or 9. See her again when she's really little. We'll also see flashbacks to when Maxwell and Niles were young, which is
Mhm.
actually kind of cute. Um, yeah, we don't go back to the kibbutz, and I don't really think we reference it again. So yeah, that's what I got for us. I think it's time to rate the episode. Um,
Mhm.
as a
And it's
friendly,
reminder.
go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, as a friendly reminder, we rate each episode from 1 to 5 lipsticks, but we reserve the right to change our rating at the end of the season. So,
Mhm.
Bernadette, I think it's your turn.
Yes, it is. Um, I'm having a bit of trouble with it. Uh, because almost as we've been talking about it, I get more and more mad at the lack of like logic or
Hmm.
like sense of time. And there's also some of the other things I kind of mentioned. Um, and so I might very much differ from you this week. I don't know. I have like no idea how you're gonna rate it. I think again having trouble, so this can be changed later. I'm just gonna give it a 3.
Oh, interesting. Um, so it's funny because when you're like, oh, I don't know how you're gonna rate it, I want it to be like, I don't know how I'm gonna rate it either. Um, again, like kind of like last week, this isn't an episode I go out of my way to watch. It's not great. It's not terrible. But you're right. As we talk more about it, the more I've been like, it doesn't really make a lot of sense.
Hmm.
The timing's weird and confusing, and somewhat distracting. I do like the flashbacks because I do like seeing everybody, you know, a decade or more before because it is interesting. Um, I I don't love this episode. I don't hate this episode. I'm also going to give it a 3. So we're we're one we're like we're multiple weeks in a row. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 weeks in a row we've
Wow, that
rated.
must be like a new record.
I think so. We'll see how we do in the coming weeks. We've got some we've got some interesting things ahead of us. So yeah, I think I'm going to stick with 3 and call it a day.
Okay.
Is there anything else you want to talk about?
I don't believe so.
All right. Well, that's all we have for you today. We hope you had a fine time with us as we revisited The Nanny. Join us next week when we'll be discussing episode 61, An Offer She Can't Refuse.
If you'd like to reach us on social media, you can find us on Twitter at Nanny Revisited. You can also send us email at a fine time nanny revisited at gmail.com. Have a great week.